Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Q&A about the presentation we did about DOTA 2. My name is Dan Rosas-Paulsen, and I'm an animator at Valve. And if you have seen the presentation, you know a little bit about us. So this is it.
And my name's Christine Phelan, and I'm also an animator on DOTA. And yeah, we're super excited to hear all of your questions today. And so feel free to ask us in the chat anything that you're curious about for our talk or for DOTA animation. So the first question that we have is, how easy is the working pipeline for testing assets, i.e. from Photoshop to in-game? I would say it's pretty straightforward. So we've had about DOTA as a product is over 10 years old. And so we've had a lot of time basically to kind of build a process for ourselves that is kind of laser focused to getting our work into the game as quickly as possible so that we can test, we can start testing. And I think it's a very straightforward, right, just had a little brain fart. Let's try that again. Yes, the priority is on getting our stuff into the game as quickly as possible so we can start testing it. And so that is everything from whether the textures read well to the models to our animation. And so the stuff that we can talk about in particular is for gameplay animation. And so yeah, like we're basically from start to finish, like Maya is our native place for animation, and then we move into the source 2, and model doc is built so that we can preview all of our animations with roughly like in-game lighting and texturing so that we can see not just like the Maya view of what's happening, but the in-game view. And can you talk a bit more too about that?
And it's very easy. As soon as, for example, talking just about animation, as soon as we have a model and we have a rig on it, it's very easy just to go in, load a map, could be the default. We have a test map for ourselves where we can just start working with our animations and start seeing how the heroes are going to develop with the animations that we have in mind, and just start testing. So it's literally, we have a tool that we just export, and we are ready to plug everything into the engine and fire away and find how it works.
Another question that we have is, this is a good one. How do you decide on adding the various idle and run flourishes that come with some of the cosmetic items? And how do you deal with the readability concerns that may arise? I think for DOTA in particular, I think we touched on this a bit in the talk. We have this enormous roster of heroes, and so readability is kind of super important at every point in the process, right? It's important for like the model. It's important, especially for animation, because after a while, you have to ensure that you're creating space between each character so that they are readable at a glance. And that's very much posing, but it's also the effects work that we do on top. And so I think overall, it's something that we have to bear in mind as early as possible. And so I think the flourishes that we add are something that provide opportunities for character to be put on those characters, on those heroes. So I think I don't know that they necessarily interrupt readability because they're not like gameplay specific in that it's not affecting the read of like the attack that I'm going to do or the cast that the character's doing. And so, but it's always like readability, especially from the top-down camera, is like our primary concern in anything that we're authoring, and especially for animation.
Mm-hmm. I remember from some of the flourishes that we had to do, for example, for Queen of Pain or Wind Ranger, it was like a fun opportunity to be able to warp that silhouette and make it something more interesting. As in a sense that you keep the idea that there's a hero there, but then you got some effects on it, some swivels. For example, Queen of Pain had the wings, so she was able to spread them. And then you're able to play a little bit with that. Whether when you have a run and then you have the basic run just running, you are concerned about keeping the hero readable. And that's like the moment where you're able to explore a little different or add a little bit to that run that you already have.
Okay, another question. So working with tools from 10 years ago can be challenging. Yes, it can. How has your tool pipeline communication with your tools engineers adapted over time, if at all? So in the talk, we talked briefly about specifically like technical artists and technical directors, and we have a pretty small group of those that are embedded on the DOTA team. But they're really great about identifying, like, we have limitations in place when you have, like, X number of characters that need to be on screen at any given time. So our original rigs that we were working with were really simple. I think we had an original bone limit was something like 53 joints. So that's something that was a really big constraint up front, and so we had to be pretty creative in terms of how we would actually use each of those and where they could be used in characters. But over time, that has improved. I don't remember off the top of my head what our joint limit is now, but I think it's in part because it's not a constraint as it used to be. And so that's something that has now gone into making the rigs a lot more flexible to the types of animations that we would want to do. Like Hoodwink is a really good example of a character who is just squash and stretch all over the place now in terms of like the amount of control that we have over the character. And the character rigs that are being built for use in game are now the same characters that we're using for like the rig setups that we're using in game are the ones that we're also using for the cinematics that we do. So they have that level of flexibility now in terms of what we can actually achieve with them, and how far we can push the actual performance of the characters.
Which segues into the next question, which is tied to that. How does the engine work with the bone stretch inside Blender or Maya? And I think you already answered that as well. We are able to just translate and rotate the bones as we see fit. And that allows us to do some squashing and stretching. And especially DOTA has some heroes like Hoodwink that have the ability to do that. Some others that are more realistic, you can also do it, but not as notable as in Hoodie or Snapfire. Another interesting thing there is that while we can do that, we also need to consider how the TDs are going to build the rig, because that can translate into the weapons. Or, for example, last year when we were working on the whip for the Queen of Pain, we couldn't easily stretch them because there were some interpolation issues between the joints. So we just had to figure out like a creative way to make it easy to the engine to read those stretchy joints.
Lana has a really good question. The top-down camera is a common and challenging angle. What are some of the greatest tips, tricks, or lessons you've learned about animation and readability in this space? So I think for me, I tend to think about the character in kind of two different planes. I'm thinking like head and weapons as like the top, as that first plane, and then feet as kind of the second. And I want to make sure that like what is the important thing for the player to be looking at and being able to read at that moment. So you're looking at it not just from the top down view, like you have to like, what do they look like when they're facing north? What do they look like when they're facing south, east, and west, and those sorts of things. And so it can be hard to ensure that top down view reads well for all four of those. And so one of the things that we also tend to do with our characters is it's not just the posing, but it's also this kind of gradient of like saturation to kind of desaturated as they go from the head to the feet. And so that is one of the things that definitely helps kind of break up those two separate planes a little bit. And then also, I think it's building in really strong like anticipation. And then we have like I guess that frame right before you're about to start moving into an attack or a cast or whatever. So it's just really, really clear silhouettes that are like, this is the thing that's happening right now, so that it's not a jumble of motion, right? Like I think that's a good starting point. And you'll add kind of overlap and follow through and that sort of thing on top of it. But as long as you have a solid foundation of like, here's my idle, here's my my wind up, here's my hit frame, here's my follow through. Those are the kinds of things that I think at the very start are like the four major kind of pillars that I'm trying to identify. And that's specifically for an attack, but I think that goes for runs and idles as well. I think in terms of our kind of, let's say you're like hypothetically starting a hero from scratch, like what are the animations that you put in the game first to kind of ensure that readability is there? And I think the ones that I tend to prioritize is like the idle, because that's like everything branches off of that. And then those cast attacks or those ability casts, whether it's your ultimate or just like one of the other smaller abilities that the heroes have, the attack, the run, and then a death. But I think for like the very first pass of an animated character, a death for us will just be like bloop, like they'll just fall over because it's communicating like this character has died and they're no longer in play. And then it's just massive amounts of playtesting, and throughout the process. We're just constantly playtesting, and so you're playtesting from the like super temp, like the hero is in, and we have like a shape model that we're working from, which is like the rough version of the model, all the way through to this final creature or character. Dan, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Just to add that as soon as you have a very clear silhouette on those topics that you mentioned, you are able to branch out easier into the other animations, especially if you're gonna do like an injured state where you have the same animations but communicating a different state of the hero, a different health. That's also really useful, just to be able to notice what you're gonna do next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that stuff too is also like for us, animation isn't the only thing that that influences or affects readability. Like I mentioned earlier, like we have this kind of gradient of color running through the hero, but then there's also like how do we interact with effects? And effects is kind of this. Like, there's a lot of overlap between the effects work that's being done and the animation work that's being done because they're both like there's both a lot of motion in both of them, and they are communicating different things. And one of the things that we try to do, and it's helpful because of our structure in that it's our groups that are working on a particular hero or character tend to be pretty small. Is there's a lot of back and forth and collaboration between the effects artist and us to ensure that like one of those things is not overpowering the other, or if they are, like how do we ensure that they're both supporting the goals of the action that's happening on screen at that moment, whether it's a like an ability or just ambient effects and that sort of thing. Like there's a lot of communication that happens very regularly on top of playtesting, and then even within that playtesting, like I can think my animation's amazing, and it reads great, but I can put it in front of one of the other folks on the DOTA team, and they're like, "What is this?" I'm like, "Well, if you don't know what it is, then I've failed in some way in communicating because animation's a communication problem. I have failed in communicating what this character is doing or what their pose is, what their action or their attitude is. And so at that point, what we're doing is a lot of like, okay, well, what did you expect to see? What are you seeing? And trying to discover where that breakdown is between what our intended posing is versus what their expectation is, or feel, which is another one, right? Like where like, oh, it doesn't feel good to like this last, like when I last hit, it doesn't feel good. It's like, okay, well, how do I drill into what it means for something to feel good from an animation perspective and from a Dota perspective, from a gameplay perspective? And so there's a lot of like just as much as, and that's why it's important to get it in as quickly as possible at an early stage, even if it's rough and ugly, in order to start working through the like how does this differ from our goal, and how do we ensure that like, with every check-in that we make and every decision that we make on an animation side, that we're marrying it to the goal of what that hero is and how they play.
Yeah, and I think we could connect this to another different question, which is how does the story of the characters influence their movement design? So we have a goal that we need to communicate, as Christine, you mentioned. We also touch base on the lore. What is that hero? What's that hero thinking? Is it a mage? Is it an agility hero? Is it an intelli, strength? What do we need to convey, not only on the gameplay design, but also on what is his or her or it personality? If it's a big lizard with a granny on top of it, then she needs to move that way. Or if it's a squirrel or a fox kind of creature, then it also needs to move that way, which is informed both by the lore and everybody on the team, and different references that we can just like grab depending on who's working on which.
Oh, interesting. This is a good one for us, Dan, actually. So I noticed a lot of Valve animators have film experience on top of games experience. Is this something you believe is important for a well-rounded animator and something you look for in team members? Dan, you and I both have never worked in feature.
That's correct.
Right? Yeah. So it's not a requirement. If anything, I think it's really important for people. Animation for games is it's not your typical like I'm gonna animate a shot and it's this linear thing and it has to do once and I'm communicating outwardly to an audience. Animation is this back and forth between player input and game output. That is it's more of a conversation than a story being told. And I think game animators are really great at not just like thinking about it in those terms, but also the entire process is so much different in terms of getting something in and playtesting and collaborating with different disciplines. And that's not to say that feature film people don't do that. But in terms of like some of the work that we do, whether it's on DOTA or other products at Valve, there's a lot more of our individual involvement in the final execution the uh, on the thing that we're working on, whether it is a hero or even an ambient creature or something that is like gameplay focused. And so gameplay is, I mean, I kind of just said it. It's kind of a conversation between the player and the designer. And when I say designer, I mean it could be the motion designer, it could be the character designer, it could be the gameplay designer, it could be all of these different people. And we need to ensure that we are giving the player the information that they need, and that they are receiving that and ingesting it in such a way that they understand the world state and what is expected of them and what their capabilities are or aren't at any given moment in time. And so it's such a different problem set that like it's really exciting to get game animator applicants at Valve because so much of what we do is so embedded in gameplay. It's such a different thought process. Like if you can animate, that's great. Feature film animators are great animators. But then the question becomes like, but do you understand why you're making the choices that you are from a gameplay perspective? And do you understand how your work integrates into the product that you're making rather than is it beautiful? Like it should also be beautiful in as much as it is able to be. But I think that there's also a point at which like you have to make trade-offs between like, do I spend a million hours making this the most delicate, beautiful finger curl that happens beneath a camera that's up in space looking down on this giant map with lots of effects and characters and everything. Like there's a point at which you have to be able to make the trade-offs between like elegant execution and like the enemy is the perfect is the enemy of the good in that kind of situation, right? So I think I think if you have feature film experience, it is very likely that you're a good animator, but that does not by default make somebody a good game animator, and does not by default confer a kind of a core understanding that we look for and are excited about for how games work and how an animator integrates with games.
We can also connect this question with what was your journey like to where you are now in the industry. So just as Christine mentioned, we are not feature animators. In my case, I was an indie developer working on a game called Kerbal Space Program. So I just learned everything I could there, and I tried to figure out how to implement heroes and implement characters in Unity, how it's going to be rigged, how it's going to be connected in the graph, how is it going to look. And then you kind of get a sense of the pipeline that you need to understand in order to put something in the game. So in my case, that was really useful. How about you, Christine?
Oh man. So before working at Valve, I've been at Valve for over 10 years. I oh my god, this is a long time. I worked for LucasArts, rest its soul, and Double Fine, and so I think were such different experiences in terms of the types of structure that they had and the type of work that we would do, right? So I think I got a really good broad range of experiences in terms of Double Fine was very hands-on, very art driven, very like character and story centric, and very I would describe it as a kind of a very similar structure to Valve in some ways, where you have a small group of people working on a feature within a game or a game entirely, and a lot of collaboration going on. And so I think that was something that I think, I went to school for animation. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design. And so one of the things that I think school could do a good job of emphasizing is that animation for games in particular is such a collaborative process, whether you're collaborating with other animators around you or other disciplines. Whereas LucasArts was like a larger, more established company that had had structures and departments. And so like animators sat with animators, and production would come in and give me or any of us like tasks to work on that were prescribed elsewhere. And I think what was really great about Double Fine, and I think working in smaller teams in particular, and is 100% my experience at Valve, is I have so much more awareness of why, like what decisions I should be making and how they matter to the product that I'm making, rather than being given like an arbitrary list of things to do. So it helps me to make better decisions when I'm informed about like what is the context in which I'm playing this thing or using this this character, experiencing this thing. And so yeah, I think those elements of my background have been pretty critical in kind of how I think about game design and how I think about game animation and the kind of things that I tend to prioritize. Oh, there's another cool question. Outside of top-down camera concerns, what would you say are the most interesting differences between animating on Dota 2 versus animating for traditional first or third person games? You're just talking about this. So um
It's all connected.
I know it's all connected. So I love doing like super cartoony, snappy animation. And I think Dota as a product is really great about that because you have to like hit hard and hit clearly. And you have to like get in and get out. Like it's a very visually descriptive in that I need to know moment to moment what I'm doing. And so it's quick, and Dota players are quick. I spent the past couple of years working on Half-Life Alyx, where it's a completely different play space. Like, not only is it like, oh, like it's a first person or a third person shooter, like you're literally a human embedded in this physical space. And so I am like living and experiencing things in that space. And wow, did I have to slow stuff down? Like going from really cartoony to a human being. It's not a mouse click or a button press. It's like a literal human being has to actually respond to what I'm animating, like understand it, ingest it, and then physically like move out of the way or catch a thing or do anything that slow humans do. And so that is like the biggest challenge, I think. There's also, I think you can do a little bit of cheating in Dota, but although I guess we can't really get away with this much anymore because the camera has opened up quite a bit in terms of where you can actually view the characters from. So early days, it was very much like we were animating to the camera and that's it. And now you can basically view characters from all views. We still prioritize that top-down view, but we make sure it looks good from all angles.
and
how
there
about
was
you,
a time. There was a time when you were overlapping between both projects, right? Did you find any challenging moments where you had to switch to top down, VR space, and then at the same time?
Oh man, that's a good question. I tend like Christine Phelan personally likes to animate a bunch of different things, so I like to change gears a lot. But yeah, I think it's just reminding myself like, what am I animating? Like even if it's a creature that does move quickly, like I still have to remind myself like, oh, humans are playing this game. So yeah, I think it's to slow it down, and then VR is something where it's like very much like you can view it from all angles. Whereas Dota is like still pretty constrained, and also like the style of the animation was quite a bit different too, not just the speed. Like Dota tends to lean a little bit more into the like expressive and cartoony, whereas Alyx was quite a bit more realistic, stylized but realistic characters and creatures.
Let's get on a question. We have 4 minutes left.
One or two more. Oh man, which one? So hard to pick. You guys are asking such good questions. Some of our favorite rigs.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And we were just talking about that in the morning.
Yeah, Hoodwink is like, she's just she's got so many fun things on her. Like she's got this long tail, she's got these cute ears, she's got this like stretchy little body, and she's just this like fast moving little squirrel creature. Like she's so much fun to play with. To play with and to animate. Like she's a delight.
And our rigger, he did such a great job on having all the controllers in place so that we can just stretch and then switch spaces and everything, and then figure out a way to leave the animation through one controller or another, and just have a nice time working with it.
There's a question: are there any specific, or is there specific animation teams on a per project basis, or is it more of a central animation team that goes wherever animation needs to be done? Yes and no. I mean, we as a group, as a team, we're kind of like we are a team of animators. We tend to kind of sit in with and embed on projects, and so there's no there's no animation lead, and there's no animation lead on projects either. And so it is this very kind of loose association, and I think in terms of how we decide where to go from project to project, it's more a matter of like I have a particular set of skills and experience that would make me best suited to helping with this particular project's problem set. So I will choose to go to those kinds of projects because I'm like, there's lots of problems to solve here, lots of challenges that need to be overcome that animation can solve. And there are things I either have experience with or interest in working on or both. Like they're not mutually exclusive. And so that's kind of how our structure is built. And so like from time to time, some projects will need people, and if any of us are in a place where we can like detach from a project to go and help out on another one or work on both simultaneously, that's something that we try to do. Yeah.
And it also depends on the needs of the project, right? If you see that the project is really in need of help and they need animators, then you grab your desk, you get your wheels there, or you change Zoom channels now that we're in the pandemic state. Where can people find us online?
Where can people find us online? My website is myname.com, so christinefallon.com. I don't have Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn too, if you want to like shoot me a message on LinkedIn.
And you can find
how
me
about
on,
you, Dan?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm Dan R. Paulson over there. And I'm also on LinkedIn, but I don't check it that often, so Twitter is the place to go. You can ask me any questions if you want to. My DMs are open, so feel free to fire away with animation stuff.
Cool.
I feel terrible having to. I feel bad having to stop. We should have given you an hour.
We have a list of questions, yeah.
there's so I don't know if you want to, if you're able to hang out in the chat, maybe answer some of the questions there. And thank you so much for taking the time to record the talk. I know that takes a lot of time to get it all working properly. The time to fill out the Q&A here. This has been absolutely fantastic. You're both great.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah,
thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks for all the questions, everybody.
Yeah, excellent work. All right, so up next we will be having the Animated Moms panel. So stick around, and thanks again, Dan and Christine.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you.